New England QSO Party from K1 Radio Oscar. K1 Radio Oscar, New England QSO Party.
Kilo 2 Echo Juliet Tango.
Kilo 2 Echo Juliet Tango. Good afternoon. You're 59 NHSUL.
Roger, Roger. I have you a 5-9 as well into upstate New York. Good luck in 7-3.
73, thanks. K1 Romeo Oscar, New England QSO Party.
So, ever since I shot my initial radio for preparedness videos, I've had a lot of people ask me about, what frequencies should I monitor? What emergency frequency should I have programmed into my radios and things like that? So I figured I would talk today a little bit about some of those different frequencies you might want to have programmed in, some of the things you might want to monitor during emergency situations. Obviously, this is not an emergency situation. This is the New England QSO Party. So you just heard me work a station. I'm on 40 meters, lower sideband. I'm on running 10 watts. Normally I have my FTDX10 up here, but I figured I'd throw the IC705 up here for a little while just for giggles. Figured I'd do a little radio on hard mode. QRP is a little bit trickier, but you heard I was 5-9 into, I believe he was in Connecticut. So, that kind of shows you the power of even a QRP radio. It's during the day, it's 2:35 p.m., middle of the day, 40 meters, and I'm working Connecticut. So that's one of the beautiful things about HF is, even during the day on some of these lower bands, I can do short range to intermediate range communications, no problem. And in an emergency situation, that's probably what you want. I'm not so worried about being able to work Europe as I am being able to work the town next to me. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about where to find some of the different frequencies that you might want to monitor, some of the different things on different bands, right? Because there are going to be different things on HF than there are on VHF and UHF, and some of them are going to be nationwide while others will be local. So in a second here, we'll hop over to the computer and we'll take a look at some of the resources you might use to find some of these frequencies. I'll talk about which frequencies you probably want to have programmed in your radios, and then talk about how maybe to find some of the other frequencies they might want to plug in, because again, some of these are going to be nationwide, but some of them are going to be regional or local. So what is good for me isn't necessarily going to be good for you. So with that being said, let's hop over to the computer. Let's take a look at some of these resources. I'll be back in just a minute. All right, everybody. So I figured we would start with sort of the authority when it comes to emergency communications, and that is the National Interoperability Field Operations Guide. This is from the Department of Homeland Security. This is the document that is going to outline all of the interoperability requirements and communication protocols and frequencies for first responders, disaster communications, all those things across governmental agencies nationwide. If you look back to pre-9/11, a lot of your agencies couldn't communicate easily with one another, and they realized that they needed a way to be able to interoperate, right? They needed to have common frequencies that in an emergency situation, everybody could use and know everybody was going to be in the right place and be able to communicate. So when you look at a document like this, and I'll put links to this stuff in the description, this document is kind of the holy grail when it comes to trying to find emergency and disaster preparedness frequencies. This is a long document. This is 192 pages long. But what you really want to pay attention to, if we scroll down through here, we get to the table of contents, you'll see that it goes through a lot of rules and regulations and things. But on page 23, it starts with the interoperability channels. All right. If we come down here, though, we come to, it's actually going to be on page 32. This isn't right, but let me go ahead and go into page 32 here. This takes us to a sample channel setup. Let me make this a little bit bigger so everybody can see it a little better. Ooh, that's a little too big. Okay, there we go. So this is a sample ICS 205 setup. So basically what you've got here is you have all of your different channels, all right, channel 1 through, in this case, 14, along with what they are and all their frequencies. This is just a sample of how you might program a radio. And again, this is This is designed for like governmental agencies, emergency personnel, police, things like that. This isn't necessarily designed for average Joe, right? So this might be what your emergency response coordinator might have programmed into all the radios. So this gives you an idea of what might be in there, and it gives you it tells you what each column tells you. Okay, so the function, the channel name, the assignment, the receive frequency, the tones, the transmit frequency and tones, mode, whether it's analog, digital, so on and so forth. All right, but if we scroll down, the first section here, these are the VHF national interoperability channels. These are what I call low band. This is like 7 meters, so this is fairly long wavelength stuff. All right, so these are all interoperability, law enforcement, and fire channels. So if you wanted to be able to listen to the interoperability channels on those bands, these would be the frequencies you'd use. Not super useful, and you're not going to transmit on these. Please understand, these are not frequencies that you ever want to transmit on in any way. Most radios you get a hold of won't, and if you have one that will, don't. This is for receive only for your own information. Okay. If we scroll down, these are our sort of these are like within sort of right outside the 2 meter ham band. So this is what most of your standard handheld radios are going to be able to listen to. All right, so these are all your calling and tactical frequencies for that stuff, along with all of the tones and whatnot. Again, you shouldn't need those. This is repeater stuff. So if they're going to run repeaters, these are all the frequencies and tones for those. All right. Again, these are inland channels. This shows you where they would use different channels, because some of these are only used in certain parts of the country. All right. So like specific places in, for instance, like Texas. Now this chart right here, this one is where things start to get useful. So that first frequency right there, 155.16, that is the common search and rescue frequency. So if you're trying to listen to search and rescue, that is probably the frequency that they're going to interoperate on. Now, there may be different groups operating on different frequencies, but they're going to communicate cross agency or cross group on 155.16 most likely. All right. You've got your fire mutual aid channels. So if you've got other fire companies coming to assist, those are going to be the frequencies they're going to use. EMS mutual aid and law enforcement mutual aid. So again, if you're trying to listen to any of those things, these are the frequencies that they're likely going to be transmitting on. Those are the ones that are designated here in this document as the interoperability channels for those things. These are all just incident and logistics things. Right? These are our tactical channels. This one is huge. So these are your NOAA weather radio channels. All right. Now, each of these is operable in different areas. So for instance, in my area, channel 3, 162.45 is the channel that transmits in my area for NOAA weather radio. You'll have to scan through until you find which one is the National Weather Service broadcast frequency for your area, and you want to program that into your radio. A lot of the radios will have weather alert capabilities. So when you're scanning, if a weather alert goes off, when the radio scans past that alert tone, it will open the squelch and you will hear the weather alert. So that's something you might want to listen to. It gives you marine broadcast stations and things like that down here. All right, these are just UHF interoperability calling frequencies. So these are in the close to the 70 centimeter ham band or GMRS. They're not in those frequency spaces, but they're very close. So those radios will be able to listen to these frequencies as well. All your incident command stuff, all your law enforcement interoperability channels are down here. Your medical UHF channels are down through here. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time going through each one of these. You can peruse this at your own leisure and decide what you want to program in or what you think is worth listening to. And then it gets up into the even higher stuff. So 700 megahertz, 900 megahertz. So these are a lot of your law enforcement and general public safety is going to be on these kinds of services. All right, 700, and you're going to see there's a lot of them. Lots of 700 megahertz. Most of your trunked systems are going to be on these. This goes on for pages and pages and pages. I mean, here's 800 megahertz. So again, you get an idea for what this document is like. But most of what you're probably going to be interested in is going to be that UHF and VHF in the 2 meter and 70 centimeter-ish area. So up here, this UHF in the red and our VHF stuff in the blue. Most of your handheld radios are going to listen to that. Now, if you want to listen to any of the other stuff, you'll either need radios that can receive in the 700 and 900 megahertz space, or what I would recommend you do is buy a good scanner. A lot of the time, this is going to be like P25 trunked systems. This isn't going to be this kind of stuff you can just listen to on regular analog radio. Now, these that you're looking at on the screen these are standard analog, usually standard analog frequencies. A lot of the stuff in the UHF spectrum is going to be P25, phase 2 usually. So like a unit and Bearcat scanner or something that can decode that is going to be useful. A standard handheld radio isn't going to do that. So if you want to be able to listen to, so for instance, here in my area, all of the police, fire, EMS, all of that stuff is all on the New York State Consortium interoperability. They have a P25 trunked system. And the only way you can hear that is with something that can decode P25. It's broadcasted in the clear. You just need a radio that has the capability of decoding that. So like I said, a dedicated scanner or something that has the ability to decode P25 is something you might want to look at. If you don't know what P25 is, it's a digital encoding process for radio. You can do a little more research if you want. If you just Google P25 phase 2, it'll give you all sorts of information on it. Again, most of the time this stuff isn't encrypted. Sometimes it is, but most of the time it's not encrypted. It just happens to be encoded in a digital platform that you need special equipment to be able to decode. Not a big deal, but it is a little pricey, so just be aware of that. Okay, so the big sort of takeaways for this particular document, you've got some big ones. So like 155.34, that's your VHF interoperability for EMS. 155.160 megahertz, that's your search and rescue common. 155.475 is your national law enforcement interoperability frequency. And then in the VHF space, that's 145.2125 and 453.4625 megahertz. When you're looking at a lot of your law enforcement and emergency use stuff, those are the big ones, right? So your national law enforcement ones, your national EMS ones, and your search and rescue. Now, if you don't want to have to go through a document like this and pull out all of the frequencies you want and program them into a radio, and I'm going to talk more about how to find some other frequencies here in a minute because this just skims the surface, but if you just want to buy a radio and be done with it, and I'm not affiliated anyway with Better Safe Radio, but if you want a radio that has all of this stuff programmed into it already, if you buy one of Better Safe radios that is programmed, it will come with all of this stuff pre-programmed. So let's suppose you wanted a GMRS radio. So we'll go radios by service, GMRS, and we'll go the Ocean KG UV9GX. I have the 9G Pro, which is the older version of the radio. You can still get that, but this is programmed with all of that stuff in there already. All right, this one's $179. This is a really nice radio. They're super heterodyne. They're pretty easy to front panel program. But it comes with all of the programming. To give you an idea, this is the programming sheet from Better Safe Radio to give you an idea of what he programs into these things. And it is hundreds and hundreds of frequencies. There are all your GMRS channels, MERS, Marine Shipping, U.S. Coast Guard, port operations, all the different ham frequencies you might want to monitor, which we're going to talk about in a minute. The International Space Station. He's got a bunch of auto racing frequencies in here. Those are mostly for like Southern California. I took those out of mine, but a lot of your air stuff, so your aviation stuff is in here. All right, U.S. Air Force, U.S. Coast Guard, NORAD, Common Commercial Air. All right, all your different airlines are in here. There's all sorts of stuff in here. I mean, just scads and scads of stuff. Federal and military intra-squad radios. All right, there it goes on forever. The U.S. Marshals, U.S. Customs and Border Control, Patrol, Secret Service, right? Bureau of Prisons, incident response stuff. This goes on for pages and pages and pages. All right. And that radio will scan all of these different things. There's all your interagency fire center aid stuff, mutual safety, all your medical frequencies are in here. And you can see this just goes on for pages and pages. It's 36 pages. There's all your search and rescue frequencies. All right. Urban search and rescue, the American Red Cross. All right. There's so much stuff in here. So if you're looking for a radio that's just ready to go, so if you wanted a ham radio, let's say, so we'll go same radio, just in ham version. All right. So that if you just want easy mode, you could buy one of these and call it a day. Now this won't decode the P25 phase 2 stuff, but it'll do any of the analog stuff. And it comes pre-programmed with hundreds and hundreds of channels already in there for you to monitor. Now, there are some organizations that have frequencies that they use, and I just want to make you familiar with a couple of them. The first one is called RACES. RACES is the Radio Amateur Civil Emergency Service. This is created by the Federal Emergency Management Agency and the FCC. All right, this is a group of amateur radio operators that operate during times of emergency. If RACES is invoked, they are the only amateurs that are allowed to transmit on the ham radio bands during an emergency. And they have prescribed frequencies and they have very prescribed procedures they have to follow, but they would pass traffic using those frequencies and those protocols. All right. Each area is going to have its own RACES group. We'll talk in a minute about how to find where your RACES frequencies might be. The other one is ARES, which is by the ARRL, or the Amateur Radio Relay League. Or is it the American Radio Relay League? I don't know. I can't remember. It's the ARES is the civilian version of this, the non-federal version of this. So this is not done through the government. This is done through the ARRL. And it's the same idea. So it would be volunteers who've gone through all the training to pass emergency traffic. It goes through all the different membership requirements down here if you want to get access to ARES and things like that. So all I did was I just Googled local New York State emergency communications frequencies. And I got this page. This is from the New York ARRL. So it gives me all the different VHF nets and the repeater that uses them. All right, now it doesn't give me any frequencies. It just tells me which repeater it is. I would have to go and find these repeaters myself. And you can see some of them. So like some of them do, Skywarn and traffic handling. So if you're not familiar with Skywarn is where people report weather incidents. So there are all sorts of different VHF nets you can listen to. These are the HF frequencies. So here you've got the New York Phone and Traffic Emergency Net, 6 p.m. daily on 3925, so that'd be on 80 meters. All right. The New York Public Operations Net is at 5 p.m. on 3925. The North Country group, so this is North Country of New York State, 8 a.m. Sundays, 3958. New York State RACES Net. So this is RACES. This is this group right here. Right? They have Sundays at 9 a.m. on 3993.5. All right. And then heads to a digital frequency after conducting its business. The alternate frequency is 7245. So they're normally on 80 meters. And if that doesn't work, they go to 40 meters. I've actually seen them on 60 meters before as well. All right. And then there's the Eastern New York section ARES Net. Tells you the fourth Tuesday of odd months at 8 p.m. on 3993. All right. So that New York State RACES Net, I've listened to that before. They just practice passing traffic using the official protocols. That way, if anything ever happens, they're ready to go. Down here, it gives me some additional service nets. So the East Coast Amateur Radio Service on 7225, and it gives me websites for them. North Central Amateur Radio Service, Intercontinental Net, Marine Mobile Service. So the Marine Mobile Maritime Net is on 14.300. If you're not familiar with 14.300, that is, like I said, that's the Mobile Maritime Service. That is on 24/7, 365. If there are boats in distress, they can call out on 14.300. And there will be someone there to relay traffic. Normally, they will have a net operator, and then other people, if the net operator can't hear them, will relay traffic into them. There's also the hurricane net, which I think is on 14.325 when hurricanes are currently active, and it works the same way. Then you've got the National Traffic System. This is through the ARRL. So if I click that, right, this gives me all the different VHF nets for this and when they meet and where they operate. So for instance, I'm in the Southern Tier, New York. So I listed the StarNet. It's at 1830 or 630 daily on 146.730. So that is the N2YOW repeater. And they are on the air at 6:30 sharp, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, passing traffic. And it's also just a general net. So once they're done passing traffic, anybody can check in. But that's there so that if all the other communications venues, all the other platforms go down, cell communication is out, internet's out, whatever, you can still pass traffic into places using this dedicated net. So it might come in from an HF net from someplace else in the country, get passed to a liaison station or a station that's going to pass traffic. When the net opens, they'll call for liaison stations or stations with traffic. Those stations will call in, they will pass their official traffic, and then that traffic gets passed on to whoever it is supposed to get to. All right. I've actually gotten messages through the National Traffic System net before. And these are all the different New York nets. The funny thing is, it shows up here that this covers Schuyler, Tompkins, Delaware, Cortland, Shenango, Chemung, and Tioga counties. It doesn't say anything about Broome. The funny thing is the repeater is in Broome County, so whatever. Anyway, these are all the different ARRL traffic nets, and then down here are the HF traffic nets. All right, same idea. It gives me all the frequencies and tells me when they meet. All right. The last thing I've got on here is my local repeaters. So this is going to be different for everybody. So obviously those state nets and emergency frequencies are going to be different for everyone in every area. The repeaters are going to be different for every area as well. So for instance, in my area, I know for a fact that the repeaters that are going to be used in an emergency, generally speaking, are going to be this WA2QEL 865 repeater and this N2IOW 146.73 repeater. That's the repeater that the StarNet is on. Those are probably the two that are going to get used in an emergency. And then this 145.39, which is the same repeater system, but farther away, that is linked. All right, so I know that those are the repeaters I'm probably going to want to make sure are programmed into my radio. There are also, I would probably also put the 70 centimeter N2YOW on there. So that guy is right here, 444.300. So that is the UHF repeater on that system. And then we also have a large Southern Tier Fusion Network system here. So this is, this covers all of the Southern Tier of New York, and it goes all along the border. All right, so it gives you the county, it gives you the repeater, and the frequencies and so on and so forth. These are all linked digital repeaters. Now, obviously in an emergency, if the internet goes down, this isn't going to work, but all the analog stuff will work, right? So if I go back over to my 2-meter repeaters, these guys are still going to work. So, you know, those repeaters are going to be big. You saw the usefulness of a 2-meter repeater on Mount Mitchell during Hurricane Helene, right? We saw how important that repeater was to getting communications in and out of North Carolina during that time, because all of their other communications were down. You'd also want to program things in like the calling frequency. So 2-meter ham band, you're looking at 146.52. 70 centimeters, you're looking at 446.00. Okay, those would be your ham 2-meter and 70 centimeter calling frequencies. Now keep in mind there are other radio services as well. So like on GMRS, we might want to program, and normally channel 16 is going to be the calling frequency, generally. All right, that's one of your high-powered channels. On CB, so if you've got a CB radio, channel 9 is the emergency channel, and channel 19 is sort of like your highway and trucker info channel. CB can be kind of a disaster sometimes, but there's no denying that it works. Now, let me just real quick talk a little bit about one of the issues with CB when it comes to some of this stuff. CB radio operates on about the 11-meter band. During the height of the solar cycle, where we are right now, it will transmit very long distances, like international distances. So people get this assumption that they're always going to be able to talk around the world on CB. At the bottom of the solar cycle, or not even the bottom, but halfway down, so you're on an 11-year cycle, when you get to towards the bottom of that solar cycle, CB is going to be line of sight local communication only. You're not going to have that propagation, okay? So it's very similar to the 10-meter ham band, which works much the same way. At the top of the solar cycle, 10 meters is booming. At the bottom of the solar cycle, it's just dead air. So if you're going to buy a CB, just be cognizant of that fact that, yes, right now, as of today, March 4th, 2025, you can, especially in the winter, you can get on a CB and talk all over the place. Do that in 5 years? Not a chance. Okay, so if you're looking for beyond line of sight communications that you know is going to always work, ham radio is going to be what you're going to want, and it's going to be primarily your lower bands, 40, 60, 80 meters. Those bands are going to be the bands that you're going to do near vertical incidence, skywave, regional to statewide, maybe, or a little further communications during the day. I mean, you just saw me work Connecticut 40 meters in the middle of the day. At night, I'll work Europe on 40 meters. Same thing with 80 meters, right? If I get on 80 meters right now, it's going to be very short, a couple hundred miles tops maybe. At night, I've worked Australia on 80 meters. So, a lot of it depends on how propagation is working. And if you don't understand propagation and what all those things mean, take a look at some of the other videos in my Radio for Preparedness 101 series. I go through all the different bands and I go through how propagation works. I talk about both VHF and UHF propagation as well as HF propagation. HF propagation, so we're talking HF or high frequency. We're talking things from the 10 meter ham band and down, so 28 megahertz and down, right? That's our HF stuff. That's going to give us our beyond line of sight communications. Generally, our VHF and UHF stuff is going to be line of sight or pretty close to it. You can get longer distances on VHF. You get things like tropospheric ducting and things like that that'll give you, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles on, say, 2 meters. And remember, when we're talking about things like VHF, like 2 meters or 6 meters, elevation is king. The higher you can get, the more people you're going to be able to talk to. So if you're really in a pickle and you need to get your signal out and all you've got is a 5-watt 2 meter HT, get to the top of a mountain with a good antenna, you can get heard a long ways. If you're doing it in the middle of a valley and you got big steep hills or cliffs on either side of you, you're basically in a tunnel. The only people who are going to hear you are other people in the valley with you. But like I said, those things, I've got videos on the channel that already talk about all those different kinds of things. I just wanted to shoot this video so that everybody kind of had an idea for where you might find some of these different emergency frequencies and what you might want to consider programming into your radio. So like I said, take a look at this National Interoperability Field Operations Guide. Pull some frequencies you think you might want to listen to. You can find your local nets, right? Both traffic nets as well as your emergency like RACES and ARES nets. Find some of your local repeaters that you might want to listen to. Program those in. Make sure you program your calling frequencies in. If you're on a GMRS radio, you're probably going to want to monitor channel 16. On a CB, you're probably going to want to monitor channel 9. All right. But keep in mind, on an HF radio, you can listen to all of the CB channels also. So I can pull up a CB frequency and listen to them on my ham radios. I can't transmit on CB, but I can listen on all the CB frequencies. So a ham radio will receive all of those. And if you get a ham radio that, let's say, will do 160 meters to 70 centimeters, so like this IC705 you saw at the beginning of this video, that does everything from 160 meters down to 70 centimeters. I can listen to everything from, any of those bands on one radio. I'm going to need different antennas, but all of that stuff can be done with one radio. So if you choose the right radio, it covers everything. Like I said, you might want to consider buying a scanner because you want to have the ability to decode some of the stuff that the analog radios won't. All right. So hopefully that helped a little bit. Hopefully nobody was lost. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments below and I will do my best to answer them. I'm not an expert in this stuff by any means. but I've done enough dabbling in it to know where to find some of this stuff. So, like I said, folks, with that being said, I really do appreciate you watching. Thank you so much. And until next time, as always, 7-3.